Hello and welcome. My name is Kirigin with Tango.vc, and today I'm talking with Brian Chen, the co-founder of two hardware startups, Bluesmart and Room. And we go deep into how startups can work well with hardware. That means how to get customer validation, how you design for manufacturing, and how you manage a roadmap, both on the short and long term. We also talk about his latest startup, Room, which can help companies have a flexible response when it comes to COVID-19 and getting back into the office. So without further ado, I bring you Brian Chen. Enjoy. All right, today I'm joined by Brian Chen, who's the co-founder of Room. Brian, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So I figured it'd be great to start out with a brief introduction, like a quick overview of the two recent companies you've built, from Bluesmart to Room, just to understand your experience. Today, we're going to focus a lot on hardware and what it takes to build quickly and the kinds of products you've built. And so just a quick overview of that experience to introduce us.
Absolutely. So in 2014, together with a few friends, I helped co-found Bluesmart, which introduced to the world the first smart piece of luggage. So it was a suitcase that had an embedded battery for charging your phone. It also had a custom PCBA, so some electronics to enable location tracking and weight sensing, and connected to your phone via Bluetooth. So the whole idea was, hey, how can we bring the Internet of Things to the world of travel and make travel more seamless through this technology? We launched that company on Indiegogo. We sold over 10,000 units, pre-sold over 10,000 units on our first Indiegogo campaign, a little bit over $2 million, and then went through Y Combinator in the class of Winter 15, the Winter 15 batch. I was there for about 3 years as co-founder and VP of operations, so overseeing everything from logistics, manufacturing, supply chain, customer support, finance, all those fun things. After Bluesmart, I got together with actually a couple other YC founders, Ryan Peterson from Flexport, Henrik Zilmer from AirHelp, and they had this idea. They had this problem where they were growing their offices dramatically. I think Ryan's company went from 20 people when I first met him to 1,000 people by the time he contacted me about phone booths. But they had this shared problem of growing offices and not having space for employees to take private phone calls. And they were like, hey, there's a company here. And they ended up being first kind of angel investors in the company. They connected me to my co-founder, Morton, and the two of us weren't so much interested in just the idea of a phone booth, but we were very interested in this idea of how we can start changing the way that offices are built and make them more people-centric, make them healthier, more creative, more productive, and ultimately more configurable through essentially prefabricated architecture, right? So the company is called Room. Our mission is to make room for people, and we have this product vision where the office doesn't require any real interior architecture or interior build out, which is fixed and very expensive, but instead uses a portfolio of modular, reusable, sustainable spaces that can essentially make the office, I would say, behave more like a digital product, in the sense that it's like adaptive to your needs versus something that you fix in time and live with for 10 years.
That sounds great. And it's actually a little ironic because, as I mentioned before, I have some landscapers in the front yard here going on. And boy, do I wish I had a soundproof room that, sometimes I could just jump into there. And it's also relevant in that, I'm working from home now because this is, early July and we have lockdown. And so in terms of the dynamism that's going to happen in offices, it's just a very special time very difficult time for a lot of people, but it's unique in that a lot of things are going to change. And I'd love to talk more about that, but just to go a little chronologically, let's start out with this contrast, because you have a consumer electronics device that is that a lot of people might buy, and it has different supply chains than what the kind of thing that gets built into furniture or officeware. So starting with Bluesmart, I've heard you describe before some of the features and how it went out. So if you could describe a little bit about the product development there. So I mean, you started out with Indiegogo, but how did you know what you wanted to build there?
The feature set that we came up with initially was very much based on personal pain points. It was, hey, have you ever lost a suitcase? Have you ever been at the checkout counter and had your suitcase be rejected or had to pay an overage fee? Like, these are all pain points I think every frequent traveler is deeply familiar with. And so, kind of plotting out that traveler experience, we asked ourselves the question, how can technology solve these different pain points? And how can this really kind of cumbersome experience where you're juggling a lot of different pieces be made more seamless through having a digital kind of counterpart to that journey, right? So that was how we designed the feature set. It was very much based on personal pain points, and the first prototypes we made were essentially Arduino. Use it for the electronics. We didn't actually manufacture anything. It was really just plug and play. And Raspberry Pi, Arduino. These are platforms now that make it very easy to experiment with different types of features like that. And we went from that prototype, and then essentially very quickly launched it to the world because we didn't know how much other people would truly want this product. So we, and in 2014, Pebble had a number of very successful campaigns on Kickstarter. I don't know if you remember the Coolest Cooler. There was this massive $10 or $15 million campaign for a cooler that happened on crowdfunding. So we thought that Indiegogo would be a good platform for us to validate demand. And once we had the prototype and we got into OIC and we made some progress on the actual product, we launched, and it far exceeded our expectations in terms of demand. And that's kind of when we knew there was something there, and really, raised venture capital and built out the team and went through all the steps to bring it fully to market.
So when it comes to the risk here, though, you have this prototype you're developing, and so you essentially had to get everything working on something that is off-the-shelf parts, but that is not the end product that is actually going to ship. So there's a gap. And so is there seems like some technology risk there, or at least manufacturability, because you don't actually put a Raspberry Pi in the end product, right? You have a custom circuit board printed at tens of thousands scale, and so there's a whole pipeline to get that developed. Certainly, customers can say, if this feature were real, I want that, which is a validation of demand. But then there's the product validation, almost like the supply side of that, where how do you know you could build this? And it might just be you're a veteran and know that the circuit board isn't that complicated and there'll be some process there. But there's also the actual parts, the exact parts that are going to be in it. Maybe you need to know that. Is there a supply chain you need to build out to know the cost of getting that to market and the cost of each component? So tell me more about the sort of the product validation that you can build and deliver what the customers want.
Yeah, so we very quickly went from that prototype and started speaking directly to the manufacturers. We also had, because we knew that we had these 10,000 units that had been pre-ordered in Indiegogo. So we knew that there was some serious volume behind that. And so we went to China, and we found after searching and working with some consultants and doing a lot of factory visits, we selected two different factories. One was a suitcase factory, and the other one was an electronics factory. And as a small team, there's a lot of work that goes into taking the product from that first prototype into one that can be manufactured, right? This whole design for manufacturability, concept that you're talking about. And as a small team, we don't necessarily have all of the pieces of the puzzle, because to build a product like this, you need mechanical engineering, embedded systems, electrical, software. And if you want an iPhone app, an Android app, then your team all of a sudden balloons very, very quickly. And firmware updates. I mean, it's and you want Bluetooth is its own kind of field of expertise, right? So what we did was we leaned as much as possible. We leaned very heavily on the engineering capabilities of our manufacturing partners, and that's something that you have to leverage the capabilities of your partners in the early stages of product development if you're a small company. If you are well funded and you build in all those capabilities in house, then you can do more in house. But if you are trying to be scrappy, then you do have to lean on the engineering capabilities of your partners. And I would say actually that was a learning for us. I think factories are very eager to sell you on their engineering capabilities, and the reality versus the promise is often there's often quite a bit of disconnect, right?
I was going to ask, because if you just described it as scrappy, and so if it costs less and is directly connected to the manufacturing, that sounds really good, but there's surely trade-offs. Is there a quality trade-off? Is there an iteration speed trade-off versus having in-house? So when you raise the funds to build up the team that can do it all in-house versus you maybe have some customer validation, but you don't necessarily have the recruiting pipeline and everyone in-house to do this, what are you trading off there?
There are certainly trade-offs, and I think taking a step back, the whole concept of going from prototype, validating demand via a crowdfunding campaign, and going from prototype to producing tens of thousands of units, I think that whole model actually is fundamentally flawed, and I think why we've seen so many crowdfunding backed products fail, and I'll break it down on a few different levels, right? So, I guess first on the customer validation level, I think one thing is you launch an idea on Indiegogo, and we said, hey, here's the world's first smart suitcase. You can buy it for $225 and receive it in 10 months. Was kind of the initial pitch of Indiegogo. And we got a ton of people to give us money for that idea, right? That's very different from saying, we have the world's first suitcase with all of these features for $225, and you can buy it now. And if you buy it now, you can take it with you on your next trip. So I think that crowdfunding, unless you've done it before and have truly kind of made some mistakes and have battle scars to show for it, it's very easy to mistake idea market fit from product market fit. I don't think we actually achieved product market fit. There was a great hunger for this idea, and it sounded cool, and people, the subset of customers who are willing to pay for something 10 months before it becomes a reality was larger than we expected. But that is very different, from people who are buying your product for a specific use case. And we thought that when we went from crowdfunding to real-time ordering, that there would be this very, natural uptick in demand. But the reality that we ended up having to confront was we're solving two different problems. We're solving a certain problem in crowdfunding, and then it's a very different problem that we're attempting to solve in real-time shipping, right? And I think that's relevant on the product development side as well that you're talking about, right? Because I wouldn't really advise anyone to go from 10 prototypes or 10 test builds to placing an order for 5,000 of something. I think that's I think we skipped.
What are the steps in between? Yeah, so what are the steps in between? Let's say that Indiegogo doesn't exist because that causes this problem of people buying something that doesn't exist yet, as I read that. And so let's say I had a hardware idea, and I have a few hardware ideas. I want an earbud that has a mic and a camera that's connected to an AI that can whisper in my ear to make me smarter. That's a specific product that I want. And that product would work a lot better if it had a camera on it to know that I'm in my office versus the bathroom or the kitchen or in my car or wherever else it is. This is a fantasy. This is maybe specifically consumer electronics, but it's not a phone, so it might be weird. And so I have that idea. I think it's okay. What are the next steps until ending at 10,000 order from whatever customer acquisition purchased a real product?
You want to have your product development kind of march in sync with your customer development. So what I mean by that is we had 10 features that we launched with: GPS location tracking, Bluetooth connectivity to your phone, weight sensing, battery charging. And we just assumed that customers wanted all of it because of the success of our campaign. And so we accelerated our product development to say, hey, let's put all of it in there. Now, I think to go from the first few prototypes to the point where you are placing an order for 5,000 units or 10,000 units, I think you really want to be very deliberate about breaking down the assumptions you have. Okay, so the assumptions being, what features are people really willing to pay for? Do they care about that entire basket, or do they care about a subset? And at what price point? Is it $225 that people want to pay for a suitcase, or is it $450? So, the reality of where we landed was we got a ton of demand. We accelerated our product development. By the time we were ready to produce at volume, we realized that we needed to charge $450 for the product. And it turns out that a lot of the features we had embedded weren't that valuable to customers. And the price point that we ended up at was way too high. And what people really wanted was a suitcase with a battery that they could buy at $225, which is also, I guess, known as the company called Away, right? And they've done very, very well. But the mistake, right, is trying to jump to the gun too much. And I think there is a pretty basic checklist of things that you do need to validate going from those 10 prototype units to the 10,000. It's okay. What is the willingness to pay to solve the problem that you are addressing? So in your case, if you're thinking about these Bluetooth but earbuds or something, right? I think answering the question, what are people willing to pay for that, and what is a specific feature set that you really need to launch with, and then
so what would that look like? So if you went back in time,
cost?
if you went back in time to you've had this successful crowdfunding campaign, you've raised a few $1 million essentially from your customers. Let's say you started at that point and you have that idea validation. What would you do? Would you interview customers and try to understand? I mean, they've sort of committed to buy a specific thing that has a feature set, and so maybe it's already too late.
It's already too late.
So let's say you have a bunch of ideas and you want to use a crowdfunding campaign, or you could raise money, I suppose. But is this just normal customer development where you talk to people and ask, try to understand what they want? Is it just those conversations with customers, the gap?
Yeah, I think you talk to people. I think you want to narrow it down to things that are as simple as possible. So you don't want to overfeature. Quite the opposite. You want to go super minimum viable product. You need to take that kind of digital product approach, and you need to find a way to validate, whether it's through 3D printing of components, hacking together kind of products through off-the-shelf with off-the-shelf components. You just have to find creative ways to validate the assumptions that are going to inform your product, your eventual product launch. I actually, one of the things we've talked about, right, is how do you iterate, and how do you do that quickly and collect customer feedback quickly? And it's tempting to think about it in terms of the very initial, customer development stages, customer interviews. But I think another very important lens to adopt is what your overall product development and life cycle looks like, and how many generations you're going to be having, is what your product roadmap looks like. And I mentioned that it was actually maybe like 6 months ago. I think Tony Fadell posted a timeline. So Tony Fadell, founder of Nest, and before that had worked on the iPod and led iPod design. He literally described from Steve Jobs greenlighting the first generation iPod to mass production was a 9-month timeline. And that's very, very fast. But it launched with a very basic feature set and probably had a very small number of buyers comparatively, right? But what they had was a disciplined process where Gen 1 comes to this date, and then Gen 2 comes a year later, Gen 3 comes a year later, and they're able to think about their iteration cycle on a longer time frame, and they're able to build up their internal capabilities on this longer time frame. The mistake that I think a lot of companies make where they've maybe only done hardware once is they really try to make that first gen they try to put all their love and energy and heart into that first gen, and rightfully so, right? But they forget that, okay, really the magic starts happening if you can make sure that you sell a few hundred of the first gen, and then there's a ramp curve where Gen 2, Gen 3, Gen 4, eventually you get to a point where your product is mature enough, and it's not just the early adopters that you're selling to, right? It is a larger audience. But those are, a lot of companies will burn out. Certainly at Bluesmart, I think we were guilty of this. We stretched the team tremendously to be able to ship on time 10,000 suitcases, and we weren't ready for it. The product wasn't ready. The team wasn't ready. And our discipline of saying, hey, we're going to launch V2 12 months later wasn't there either. Instead, we launched a V1.5 6 months later, and that meant our V2 was 3 years after our V1, and that probably set us back, tremendously, right? So those, I think, are the types of customer validation. It definitely needs to be thought of in this the prototyping stage for sure, but it also needs to be thought of in the context of years, not weeks, right? Because the magic does happen, and the where you can build great products. You're never going to build a great product in Gen 1. Right?
Yeah. So let's fast forward a little bit, because you have a new company you're running that's been informed by this wisdom, these battle scars, and I can see already in the way you talk about the product, because you are sitting in a phone booth currently, and that can easily be like a first kernel of a product, very low price point relative to a full office build out, and you can imagine getting in there, and then all the way to some crazy moving walls of like some fancy office of the future. I could see these generations being built in. And so how does your current product roadmap get built, like in terms of customer feedback? And you still need to ship the product you're sitting in now and the second version of that, and so those definitely are also getting iterations on them. And so how are you currently running Room?
So when we started Room, we had a few prototypes first to figure out whether people wanted to be in a small enclosed space to take phone calls, and those were basically handmade products, right? And very quickly saw that pretty shitty products, like it would get super hot in our first units, but people would camp out in those spaces for hours, and they would be pouring down sweat, but they would be very happy on their phone calls because it was such a painful experience of being in an open floor plan, not having privacy. So that was very deep customer validation for us, right? That people would be willing to withstand this pretty initial, really an MVP product, but use it constantly. But what we took from that also was we could have made a smartphone booth from day one and had, occupancy sensors and lights that dim and change colors, and we could have added a lot of bells and whistles. We did not. We tried to keep it really, really simple. We tried to design for that with that simplicity in mind. We established a price point that we thought made sense via customer interviews. And our first, we engaged with a factory not in China to start, but actually in Portugal. And the factory that we started engaging with in Portugal, they were capable of making about 3 to 4 units per day. So we were selling our product, so not crowdfunding campaign, but we validated demand by using search engine marketing. So to avoid that problem of idea market fit, you want people to search for your product, see it, buy it, use it. And we try to compress and accelerate that cycle as much as possible. And so while we found this factory...
Did you do this when you had a product available or earlier? Was it still like before the product was done? Did you take orders?
Once we found the factory and we knew that we would be able to, in a few months, start making 3 to 4 units per day, we started taking orders. It was a website built on a Wix site. On Wix it was like I think the order form said we're sold out, enter your information, and I would call the customer and talk them through it and this kind of stuff, right? So it was very like hacked together, but what it helped us validate was like the assumptions that we needed to validate for building an eventually great product. So we went from this factory that could make 3 to 4 units per day. We saw tremendous amounts of demand, and we saw in our first 2 months of selling our truly Gen 1 product, which we got from prototype to factory up and running in about 6 months, right? We in the first couple of months of going live, we had calls from Nike, from Samsung, from Microsoft, IBM, and that was again indication of product market fit. And we used the first shipments that we had to test and refine the product itself. We realized we needed to improve ventilation dramatically. We wanted to improve the look and feel of the product dramatically, and we used all of that. We were able to validate that price point by actually selling it, and then we gradually increased our order size with the factory, right? And everything we were doing was essentially pre-orders, shipping on 8 to 10 week lead times, so that we didn't have to build up inventory. This was, I would say, this is the nature of the product. So it's not, I think with consumer electronics, if you are doing a custom, printed circuit board, there are worlds in which you have to order 1,000 or you have to order 5,000. So I think even in this world, if I were going back to doing a truly kind of consumer electronics at the earliest stages, I would just find a way to limit the number of units that you have to order up front, and so that you can validate and test things over time. And one of those ways is to not pre-order on a 10-month kind of pre-order timeline, but a few weeks. And that helps you finance, the initial inventory build, and it helps you validate demand. But we were able to learn a lot from how our phone booth was used. We learned that people were using it to solve this very pain point of open floor plans that don't have privacy, don't have a place for people to focus or get quiet work done. We realized that there was a lot of very strong product market fit, specifically with flexible office providers. So some of our first customers were Notel, Industrious, New York-based companies that provide flexible offices. And working with them, talking to them, they said, our pain points are we're trying to turn leases around super quickly. We don't have 6 months to do build outs. We have a few weeks. We need to bring down the cost of construction, and we need to be able to prepare the space in a way that is ready for a new tenant in a very short period of time. And so they loved our phone booth because it was so different from doing something with drywall or sheetrock. It was actually a superior product. It was more affordable and more flexible. And so the way that we've kind of validated our product demand is by seeing our product actually in use, talking to our customers, understanding what is the deep underlying driver of demand, and applying those principles to the rest of the product universe, right? So that is where we have this vision now of what we call adaptive architecture, where the office environment uses the same principles as the phone booth, where it ships flat, assembles on site, is affordable, is movable, uses sustainable materials, and can truly help the office be adapted and optimized, purpose built for the people in the office.
Mm-hmm. And so you have the owner, or in some cases the person that's having a flexible office plan, and it's the idea then to say like, well, this company, they need 10 conference rooms that have 10 seats in them. But then if there's some turnover and actually to change this, you don't actually need to have months of rebuilding the space, but you just adjust it so you have, maybe private offices for people that don't want to open floor plan. And is that flexibility going to be baked into the product? Because there's another example here of where like, what I'm imagining is maybe some fantastic world, and it might not match up in what your initial versions of this can do. And so how are you tuning like what exactly reconfigurability means when you go beyond just a phone booth?
So there's the longer term vision, right? And what we've had to do is break that longer term vision down into more discrete steps. And so we talk internally about an Act 1, an Act 2, and an Act 3 of kind of our product vision. Act 1 is phone booths, right? And it is what we've spent a lot of time making sure that we have a high performing product that that we feel really good about, that is mature for a mature market. Act 2 for us is purpose-built rooms. So it's actually not quite as adaptive as we eventually want, but it is larger format products using the same logic of the phone booth with a few tweaks. But they are, we're launching a meeting room designed for kind of 4 people. We're launching an open meeting room, which is kind of a nook. And then a private office. They all exist within the same footprint. They're truly purpose built. So a meeting room that is truly purpose built for hybrid collaboration, for example, where if you go in, there's a camera with the camera angle is perfectly optimized to take a 180-degree view of 4 people. You see the screen, you don't have to play around with it. It kind of eliminates all the problems that you experience walking into a standard conference room that's not purpose built, but is hacked together with hardware that has to fit, an infinite number of wall and room permutations. So we've truly kind of productized what a meeting room is and needs to be. And we've been able to optimize for those use cases and in these larger form factors. And now we're actually starting to add in some of the bells and whistles that we think will be really important for the ultimate vision, things like occupancy sensors. So our purpose-built meeting rooms come with occupancy sensors so that if you're a facilities manager or an office manager and you want to visualize and see, okay, what spaces are available or what is the typical utilization of these different spaces, then you have data to actually answer those questions. And that data can help you make changes to your floor plan. It can help you, instead of walking around looking for an open space for 20 minutes, help you wayfind more efficiently. But these are kind of the building blocks for Act 3, where it's not just these smaller rooms and private offices, but the entire floor plan, where we will be armed with more customer feedback and more data and all the learnings from Act 1 and Act 2 to actually execute on Act 3. And I think Katerra is a company that comes to mind that maybe tried to go from 0 to Act 3 like in a year, and they did that by raising $1 billion, right, and trying to replace building construction through a technology-enabled way. I think personally, I don't know how that works, and don't know that that's a recipe to be successful, because you don't gain from the insights and the learning along the way.
I mean, if you look at the founders of Katerra, I think there may be a half dozen people that could raise like they raised. They have the track record, and actually don't know how well they're doing yet, because they might be so optimizing for that 5th, 6th generation, just go straight to that, which requires hundreds of millions of dollars in development. But I guess the market will play it out.
Yeah. Jury's still out for sure. But yeah, I certainly, from humble Bluesmart origins, would not be able to raise $1 billion for what we're doing.
So when it comes to the huge changes coming from COVID, what do you expect to see happen, and how is that affecting your roadmap?
Yeah, COVID was a tsunami-sized curveball for us, for sure. And I think ultimately it ends up being a tailwind for our business, and ends up accelerating and catalyzing a lot of the change that we wanted to happen anyway, right? So what we've had to do is we've had to pay a lot more attention to sanitation and cleanliness, air filters, and things like that, for sure. But that's kind of new table stakes, right? But the other thing it's forced us to do is really actually accelerate our timeline, because people in today's world, the changes of the changing requirements of the office are changing at such a fast pace that it becomes very clear that fixed construction is not going to work, right? And it's forcing, I think, commercial real estate to really come to a reckoning, where the downward pressure on long-term leases is extraordinarily high. It's very hard to plan 10 years in advance. It's very hard to know what work is going to look like, what percentage of your workforce is going to be in the office. These are pretty foundational questions if you're thinking about how much real estate you need. So I think what's clear is we need real estate that's dedicated to work and to offices. How much of it we need, what the right density is, these are open questions where the answers will change with high frequency over the next couple of months, honestly, right? Every few months it's going to change. And so in that if that's the world that we live in, it would seem very silly to make a decision that you have to live with for the next 10 years. So, but it makes a lot more sense to live with a decision where you can move a space type around. It's designed for virtual collaboration, which is definitely going to be a fixture for our lives, even years after COVID disappears. And things where you can truly, de-densify as needed, add things as needed in a really just modular way. So we think we see our product being very highly relevant to how people return to the office. And we're doubling down on kind of bringing these new products to market.
Yeah, that's incredible. If you think about the entire economy, you have decades of trying to do more from less, which will continue. But then also just trying to, squeeze out margins where you can. And so many industries are very, very low margin, when actually flexibility and dynamism might be another dimension where you want to pay for that adaptability. And, you see these calcified institutions across our entire economy that are not designed for flexibility. And so they have all these crazy side effects. And, there's a lot of people in tech that are accustomed to that dynamism that see this when it comes to, regulations on telemedicine or the pipeline of approving drugs, or, how, so maybe restaurants can't stay in business unless they start selling alcohol. So like maybe delivery of alcohol should be like something they incorporate, but normally that's like a big fight in local government. And so how do we get these kinds, and that's just one of course, 1,000 decisions to make. How do you make these decisions faster? And so I think office space, this is more, let's call it micro, where a company has to make a certain decision, and whether it's the owner of the real estate or the company that wants to host employees and keep them safe, they have to be able to adapt to the situation very quickly. So I could definitely see this as a tailwind. So good luck riding that tsunami.
Thank you. Yeah, no, and I think that the dynamism you're mentioning is it's not a small change, right? It's not just a change of business model, but similar to what you're saying about telemedicine and other things, it requires changes in regulatory frameworks, in how people finance and value commercial real estate, like going from a world of 10-year leases to shorter term kind of dynamic environments is not going to happen overnight, but this moment does catalyze all of those things, and it drives up the urgency to make these changes. So I think that honestly is very exciting, and we are, I think we're in a very great position and a very exciting time to be working on what we're working on.
Oh, that's a great note to end on. So thank you so much for taking the time, and good luck.
Yeah. Thanks, Ivan.